Thank you, Judge Motley, for making today necessary as well as possible. We are really very honored, and I am personally honored, to be a part of this very significant occasion, really a profoundly important milestone in the legal history of our state, because we honor today not only a mind and a person, an intellect, and a lifetime, but also a tradition and a kind of faith in our system and our law to accomplish justice. I want to say at the very outset that we are going to hear from some very, very eloquent speakers today, and as I was entering the room, in fact, I was reminded of a story about a truly distinguished and eloquent speaker, Adlai Stevenson, when he was campaigning, I think it was for President of the United States, and after he was done with his remarks, one of the spectators came up to him, young man, said, "Governor Stevenson, that was so eloquent, it was superfluous." And Adlai Stevenson had a bit of a sense of humor himself, and he said, "Well, thank you very much. It was really nothing, but I think I'll have it published posthumously." And the young man hadn't had enough. He said, "Well, Governor, the sooner the better." So I'm going to be done sooner rather than later. But let me just say, for all of us who aspire to be public interest lawyers, this book is a roadmap for how to do it. And it illustrates a number of propositions about how to advocate on behalf of the public interest. First, that justice requires more than the simple platitudes of everyone needs or deserves a lawyer, that justice requires lawyers to become involved in the public interest. It demonstrates that being a public interest lawyer requires the kind of fortitude and perseverance, courage and conviction that Judge Motley demonstrated, along with a handful of other lawyers, when being a public interest lawyer on behalf of civil rights and civil liberties required that particular brand of bravery that is uncommon in our history, was certainly unfashionable and infrequent then, but is always uncommon in our history and requires the kind of model that she provided. And another point that struck me as one who aspires to be a public interest lawyer is that justice is always a work in progress. It is never a feat that is achieved finally. And because it is never accomplished finally, the more of us who can aspire to that wonderful profession of being a public advocate, the more likely it is that we will really protect those who are most fragile, whose voices are most difficult to hear, who are most invisible, and who require that kind of public advocacy that she did in a very significant, profoundly important period of our history. And finally, justice is not a spectator sport. Everyone needs to be involved for this system to work, whether we're lawyers or citizens. The democratic process and our system of justice requires the kind of leadership that Judge Motley provided, but that she inspired others to show as well. And it is perhaps her example and her model, as recounted in this wonderful book, that will have an enduring meaning for students and all of us are ultimately still students, especially in her presence, and for the attorneys and public officials who hopefully will carry on the traditions that were established in the course of her public advocacy. I can tell you that when I left the United States Attorney's Office in 1981, I took a case from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, a death penalty case, because of the example that she had set, the inspiration she had provided along with others. And I think there are people all across this country who have been inspired by that example. And the good news is that the story is continuing, and that it's not only a story in writing in black and white, it's a living story. And that ultimately will be one of the most enduring legacies of this book and of a great career. Thank you.
When I started law school in the fall of 1972, I quickly learned the name of Judge Constance Baker Motley. It was one of a handful of judicial names that I and my classmates became familiar with, it seemed, almost instantly. There were lots of federal judges out there, but only a few that crossed our youthful horizon. These were the judges who had a reputation for fairness, for decency, for humanity, and for an iron-willed commitment to the principle of justice. I heard her name early on and grew with my classmates to associate a very high degree of respect, bordering on reverence, with her name. To have a clerkship with Judge Motley. This was a supreme prize, something to be sought after and worked for, a high honor indeed. So very early on in my own professional career, I developed the most positive associations possible with the name of Judge Constance Baker Motley. But these were all confirmed some years later by an even higher authority, my father-in-law. You see, my father-in-law was for many years a court reporter in the Southern District. His name is Jack Greenberg, and is well known to the judge and her husband. And around the dinner table in the evening, often enough, he would review his day's work and talk candidly about this judge and that judge. And if you think that legal scholars are harsh critics, I can assure you that observant court reporters are even more particular in their judgments. He is one of your most enthusiastic fans, Judge, and always spoke of you around the family table with that same respect bordering on reverence. And he knows you and your work in the classroom at close hand and speaks with a genuine authority. So from every possible angle, the professional and the personal, over the course of my adult life now, I have gathered around your name the most wonderful constellation of associations. Today we have come to celebrate a great life in the law and a great book which recounts that life and some of its outstanding episodes. This is truly a fascinating book, fascinating for a half a dozen different reasons. It's a fascinating account of a growing up in New Haven in the 1920s and 30s when the city was a very different place in many ways, and in many ways very much the same place. It's recognizable to me dimly and distantly, the New Haven you describe, and I couldn't really make up my mind whether it's a a radically far away and different place, or the same place that I know and live in today. But a fascinating, absolutely fascinating story. The story of how you found your way to Fisk and then to NYU and eventually to the Columbia Law School. Amazing in its detail and in the steadiness, the quiet steadiness of character and moral ambition, which informed the march every step along the way. The absorbing account of your work at the Legal Defense Fund in the post-war years and the pre-Brown litigation and the strategizing and the careful marshaling of legal arguments and the enormous courage, the enormous moral courage that was required to march ahead in pursuit of this clear, steady, but always unavailable, never quite reachable, and then finally attainable ideal. The story of Brown itself, the story of the massive resistance to Brown, of the Southern states' refusal to accept the law of the land, and the complicated, ingenious, imaginative legal strategies that were required to put that law effectively in place, and the moral courage that was required, again, to do that. The change in career, the move to politics, and then your appointment to the bench and the extraordinary career as a federal judge that has followed. A remarkable story, interesting to a half a dozen different audiences for 100 different reasons. But ultimately, of greatest importance, not because of the tales it tells and the incidents it recounts, but because of the character it reveals. A book like this can be a bare description, or it can be a revelation of its author's being. And this book is plainly that. You have given us an example which for the whole profession, I would say for every citizen in America, is a treasure and a legacy and a permanent spiritual asset. It's one thing to have an ideal and to profess belief in it, but to see a whole life lived steadily and courageously in the service of that ideal actually gives one the confidence to go on and to believe that it's worth it, that the road may be long and the way hard and rocky, but you can do it, you can make it, and it's worth it. At a time when doubts about the legal profession abound, within the profession as well as without it, we desperately need examples of the kind that you have given us in your whole life, continue to give us, and that this book puts into plain print for all the world to read. Thank you for all you've done. Thank you for putting it down so elegantly and movingly, and thanks for honoring us with your presence here today. You're great. You really are great.
I quote from Langston Hughes. "But for ourselves who are colored and know our plight too well, for ourselves there is a need, more than anything else, of great patterns to guide us, great lives to inspire us, strong men and women to lift us up, and give us confidence in the powers we too possess. Judge Motley, I pay tribute to you from the Connecticut connection of the Southern Connecticut Lawyers Association, the George Crawford Law Association, all minority lawyers in Connecticut, and the civil rights public interest lawyers, and I too, a native nutmegger from Norwalk, Connecticut. Early in the 1960s, when I graduated from Norwalk High School, my birthplace town, there were only a few black lawyers in Connecticut and only one in Fairfield County. However, when I arrived at Howard University in Washington, D.C., and became a student and civil rights activist, I quickly learned the legal legacy of Charles Hamilton Houston. Thurgood Marshall, James Nabrit, Oliver Hill, George E.C. Hayes, Robert Carter, Herbert O. Reed, my mentor, and you, Judge Motley, from my home state, tiny Connecticut, and the only woman among the masters. Collectively, all of you inspired me to go to Oxford, Mississippi in 1969, immediately upon graduation from law school as a Greenhorn civil rights lawyer. I immersed myself in the history of your representation of James Meredith integrating Ole Miss University in my newly adopted hometown earlier in that decade. In 1949, Judge Motley tried her first case in Mississippi, one of the first African Americans to try a case in the federal court of the Magnolia State, and a female too. Inspired again by our Connecticut connection, I brought my first school desegregation lawsuit in Oxford, Mississippi in 1969. We too successfully integrated the public schools at Ole Miss's town. 20 years later, after returning to Connecticut, I, along with several prominent national civil rights and civil liberties organizations, including your most cherished, lasting, and significant employment place, the Legal Defense, Inc. Fund, brought the second school desegregation lawsuit in my career that led to the landmark Supreme Court decision in Sheff versus O'Neill. In fact, I came directly here from the Superior Court in Middletown, Connecticut, where we are in the second week of the trial on a show cause order why the state has not implemented an effective remedy. The unconstitutional racial and ethnic extreme isolation remains in Hartford and the surrounding districts more than 2 years after the Supreme Court decision without a concrete state plan with goals and timetables to remedy the problem. Have you been there, seen that before in your career, Judge Motley? My co-counsel from the Inc. Fund, the ACLU, the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, the Hartford Legal Aid Society, and private attorneys send you warm regards at this celebration. Someone said that the great turn stumbling blocks into stepping stones on their way to singular achievement, and their character is measured not so much by what they achieved for themselves as by what they achieved for others. Mr. Justice Marshall was one of the greatest of all the civil rights lawyers because he taught you, he inspired you, he uplifted you, and he achieved for us all. Judge Connie Motley, you have extended that legacy to me and to others. Like Justice Marshall, a civil rights legal warrior, a judge on the bench, and an inspiration to us. But you are our Connecticut heroine, and for that I say from the bottom of my heart, in the old Southern vernacular, much obliged, much obliged, much obliged.
Judge Motley, it's been such an honor for Kate and I to work on this because the response has been so overwhelming from those who wanted you to know how much they appreciate what you've done during your illustrious career. And we've received so many letters from so many people, but we're, in the interest of time, only going to read a few, but I will acknowledge and recognize many. We have letters from Senator Lieberman, from Senator Dodd, from the Honorable Eleanor Holmes Norton, from your very first law clerk, Lynn Walker, from the president of Quinnipiac Law School, from the president of Quinnipiac University, and many, many others. I'm going to just read two of them in the interest of time, and then Professor Kate Stith-Cabranes will also read others. And I'd just like to say one thing before we read the letters. I know those who are coming in think that we're rather hard-nosed, but the fire marshal has indicated that we cannot have more in this room, so that's why we're turning people away at the door. Okay, otherwise we would certainly accommodate everyone who's coming in. They are going to 201 and 203, and they're seeing these proceedings on closed circuit. The letter that I'm going to read is sent from Julian Bond, and it reads as follows. It's addressed to you, Southern District of New York, and I won't read the address. Dear Judge Motley, as you receive your most recent well-deserved honor, please let me add my few words to try to let you know what you have meant to me and what you meant to youngsters working in the rural South in the early 1960s. We were frankly contemptuous of the NAACP, whose board I now chair. In our ignorance, we recognized there had been other, perhaps braver souls before us, but could not imagine anyone could match or meet our own brand of daring. And there you were, standing up before red-faced judges in the small-town courtrooms that had never seen your like before. You spoke plainly but eloquently about the law and the Constitution. You might have lost there, but you were certain to prevail when you took the case higher. And through it all, you faced dangers we couldn't imagine because you dared to do the unthinkable. You were as good as they came. It has been the NAACP's pleasure to have been associated with you through these years, through our companion organization, the Legal Defense and Education Fund, Inc., and through our pride as you rose through elected offices and onto the federal bench. Congratulations on the publication of your autobiography, and congratulations on a well-lived life. We always expected much, and we have never been disappointed. Sincerely, Julian Bond, Chairman, NAACP, National Board of Directors. And I'm going to read an excerpt from the letter from Senator Lieberman. It's also addressed to you at the federal court, and I'm going to leave out the first couple of paragraphs and begin the next. Inspiration and pioneer words that I fear are too often used to describe those we wish to praise. But I frankly can think neither of better words to describe Judge Motley, nor of any person to whom they more aptly apply. Few of us are lucky enough during our lifetime to break even one path or to bring even one significant positive change to the world. But Judge Motley has done both, and she has done so many times. Whether it was fighting the historic legal battles of the civil rights movement, working as an elected leader in New York City, or serving as the first African-American woman on the federal bench, Judge Motley has, by her example, repeatedly shown us all that nothing is impossible for those who commit themselves to serve the public good. I am truly proud to share a hometown with her, and I wish her success with her new book. Sincerely, Joseph Lieberman. Professor Stitt is going to read, Stitt-Cabranes, I'm sorry, is going to read a letter, and then all of these letters will be bound and they will be delivered to you.
I had the privilege of serving as the Yale leg of the organizing committee. And as you can probably guess, this leg did considerably less organizing than that leg. Marilyn, it's been terrific working with you. But this was really a three-legged stool, and I also want to point out another distinguished Connecticut lawyer named Constance, and that's Connie Royster, the judge's niece, who worked closely with us. We received several letters from Yale associated people, which I know the judge has gotten. And there's one letter that I want to read. I had asked Burke Marshall to speak today, and he regretted greatly that he is on the West Coast this whole week. But he spoke a bit about his admiration for you, Judge, and I asked him to write down the remarks in a letter so I could read it, and I will do so. I am one of those who has had the privilege of sharing a courtroom with her as a litigant. Although the interests of our clients, hers being James Meredith and mine being the federal government, did not at all times completely coincide. I was nevertheless with her in spirit, if not in all the details, both in some proceedings in the United States District Court in Mississippi, and several before then at the Fifth Circuit, at times sitting on bank. She brought then, as throughout her litigation career, a presence of dignity, grace, and intelligence to the courtroom conflicts that few lawyers can produce. I believe it affected for the good even the attitudes, if not the judgments, of the federal trial judges in Mississippi and of many members of the Mississippi Bar of the 1960s. I also have had the privilege of appearing in her own court, although not as a litigant. She is, as she should be, one of the most respected trial judges sitting, with her reputation and goodwill from those appearing before her growing over her 3 decades of judicial duties. She's a credit to her profession with few peers, with a career and integrity only a small number of lawyers can match. I hope you will extend my warmest best wishes and respectful regards. Sincerely, Burke Marshall.
It is now my privilege and honor to introduce the Executive Director of the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, the Inc. Fund, ELAINE Jones.
Margaret Mead wrote someplace that she said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Charlie Houston, Thurgood Marshall, Bob Carter, Connie Motley, Jack Greenberg changed the world at the Legal Defense Fund. And Connie Motley came to the Legal Defense Fund as a law student, her 3rd year at Columbia, and came as a law clerk to Thurgood Marshall. And then you would think she would have learned, because you know Thurgood heaped it upon her, the work. After she left Columbia, she took a position with the Legal Defense Fund on the staff and stayed with LDF for 20 years. She was with us really from 1945 until 1965. When you look at all that she has accomplished, I, as Director Counsel, realized that Judge Motley left the Legal Defense Fund 33 years ago, and she left some whopping footprints, huge footprints that we're still trying to fill. But and as I read Jack's book, Crusaders in the Courts, and I look at the huge salaries that LDF paid then, which we continue to pay, that tradition. When she and Jack Greenberg both received a promotion in 1952. They became assistant counsel. And they got a whopping salary increase from, they were paid at the time $3,600 a year, and it was increased to $4,200 a year, nearly 20%. So they had hit the mother lode. There were, during the 60s, I noticed when you read LDF history and you read the cases and what has gone on at the institution, we see Judge Motley arguing 10 cases before the United States Supreme Court while at the fund. The first case she argued in 1961. The last case she argued in 1965 was Swain versus Alabama, the peremptory challenges case, the jury case in Alabama. Judge Motley won 9 of those cases, of those 10 arguments. And then you wonder, well, what happened with the 10th, which was Swain? And you just had to see when you understand that the court had to catch up with Judge Motley. and it took them 21 years to do it. But in 1986, the court came back in Batson versus Kentucky and agreed with the position that Judge Motley had taken in 1965. So she really is 10 for 10. Those of us at LDF, Victor Bolden is here with us, Associate Counsel, Legal Defense Fund. Our cooperating attorneys, are here with us. We continue to try to make this difference. Now, there is a big difference between you and me in many respects, Judge Motley, but there's one big one. In your tenure at the Legal Defense Fund, you were trying to get in the Supreme Court. I'm trying to stay out. And so, but putting that aside, it is all a question of strategy. We do what we must. When you were interviewed in 1960, around 1962 or 63, I'm not sure of the date of the interview, that particular interviewer listed your docket at the time. Now, I knew you had been involved in all of these cases, but I thought maybe many of them had been spread out over the course of the 20 years. But I didn't realize that around 1962, a description of your caseload is as follows. Her current cases are spread across the spectrum of the civil rights legal struggle, but there is a concentration on school desegregation actions. Of 18 school desegregation cases, which she is personally conducting, 12 are countywide suits in Florida, 2 are in Tennessee, 2 are in Georgia, and 2 are in South Carolina. In Escambia County, Florida, one of her cases seeks to desegregate the Pensacola public school system. There, the legal battle has moved from the district court in the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, which has returned it to the district court with instructions that the school board submit a more satisfactory desegregation plan. Then it continues. She is also directing the legal assault upon Jacksonville's segregated public school system, which began with a suit filed on December 6, 1960. A decision is awaited in another suit brought in Atlanta, Georgia, to have teachers and pupils of the city schools reassigned on a non-racial basis. She is the attorney of record in a suit to prevent continued segregation at Alabama Vocational Technical School in Mobile, Alabama. Other Motley-directed civil rights legal actions include a suit filed on behalf of Jackson, Mississippi residents to enjoin state officials and police from enforcing laws requiring segregation in bus, railroad, and airline terminals. She's also directing a suit to desegregate the public parks and playgrounds of Tampa, Florida, and one to outlaw racial discrimination at the Tampa, Florida International Airport restaurant. One lady's docket in 1962. Judge Motley, you continue to inspire us. You continue to teach us. The perspective is not only a historical one, it is a present one. It is ongoing because the struggles continue in many different forms. Abraham Lincoln told us if there's anything that links the human with the divine, it is the courage to stand by a principle when everybody else rejects it. We thank you for coming home to celebrate your birthday with us. Bye-bye.
I want to say hello for the first time, but not the last time, to Judge Motley. I'd like to acknowledge, of course, Judge Calabresi, the once and always dean of the Yale Law School, and the existing dean, and my favorite dean. He pays my salary, and he's also a great guy, Anthony Cronman. Dick Blumenthal has been a great attorney general of our state, a person I worked with as an employee of the Justice Department at the same time. Of course, I want to thank ELAINE Jones, my leader and colleague for many years at the Legal Defense Fund. And I think really Marilyn Ford and Kate Stith-Cabranes deserve another round of applause for the wonderful job they did in putting this together. Judge Motley, you've done something that's important not only to the nation and being who you are, but you have, I think, brought the Yale Law School and Quinnipiac Center of Law together in such a harmonious and happy occasion that I think we will have many more of these. This, I think, is a wonderful step forward in the collaboration of these two law schools in your hometown. It makes us a better place, and we hope it makes you want to come back even more often. And it's a pleasure to see so many people here. I don't think anybody has convened so many people so quickly as this dedication to Judge Motley. I think it is a living testament to how great a person she is and how much she means to so many people throughout New Haven, throughout Connecticut, throughout the country, indeed throughout the world. Now, my official responsibility was to introduce Judge Motley and tell you about her, but of course the organizers have done such a wonderful job of describing her career in the invitation program that I think it would be General Blumenthal superfluous for me to go through that again. What it is obvious. It's a hit parade of firsts in law and in politics and on the bench. But I think what's so important about her career is that she has inspired hundreds, indeed thousands, of young people to pursue professional careers in public interest and civil rights. And I count myself proudly as one of those people who felt the inspiration of her career and guided my life to the best one can with her model in mind. She's one of my heroes, models, and I'm happy to say of one of my dear friends. I met Judge Motley some years ago, but who's counting? I recall it was shortly after I joined the staff of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and Judge Motley was in the process of revising a publication, a large, thick book called the American Negro Reference Book. And my recollection is that I got a summons from Jack Greenberg, or indeed maybe from Judge Motley herself, that I was going to help her out on this project, and I jumped at the opportunity to just sit at the same table, to sit next to her and hear her talk about law and talk about what law could mean and what changes could be wrought by effective lawyering over the years. Now, there was a kind of dark side to my relationship with Judge Motley. You see, when I became a lawyer on the staff of the Legal Defense Fund, I inherited Judge Motley's school desegregation cases in Florida. And I can remember those many depressing nights, Judge Motley, in a little motel room somewhere in Florida, trying to get my act together, knowing that I'd be going before a not-so-happy camper, a federal judge the next morning, who was going to say no, and I was going to be on my way to New Orleans to the Court of Appeals shortly after the judge ruled. But you also gave me the opportunity to desegregate the segregated school system I attended in Hillsborough County, Florida. So I thank you for giving me a chance to give back in a very interesting way to the elementary school system I attended. And when I was nominated by President Carter to be the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights in the Justice Department, one has to make a very important decision right off the bat, and that is which judge is going to be invited to administer the oath of office. And it took me about a microsecond, an ignosecond, to have Judge Constance Baker Motley's name come to mind because I decided when I raised my right hand and put my other hand on the Bible and swore to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, I wanted somebody holding that Bible who understood exactly what that meant, and that was Constance Baker Motley, because her career is really about supporting and defending the Constitution of the United States, and for that we are very, very grateful to you. I want to say a few words, although Dean Kronman has, I think, done his usual wonderful job of encapsulating a complex and very important work that is your book. But one of the things that strikes me about the book, Judge Motley, is that there are people and there are books. There are people and there are people who write books about themselves. And sometimes you know the person and you know the book, and they don't seem to be quite in sync with one another. Your book is very much in sync with who you are, for those of us who know you. It has that fairness and accuracy about your description of the law and events, but perhaps more than anything else, it has that absence of recrimination and blame and bitterness that could easily come with the disappointments that you experienced over many years going into those courtrooms in the South and elsewhere in this country trying to defend the Constitution. I'm reminded of a story that you've undoubtedly heard many times, told by one of your colleagues and one of our colleagues at the Legal Defense Fund, a white lawyer who described how in the late 50s and early 60s, when you were about to leave New York to go down into God-forsaken country to represent black people and poor people in federal court who were marching for their rights, he had to go down and stand on the curb and hail a cab for you because none would stop to pick you up as a black woman. To put those into juxtaposition, I think, is a very powerful image. This was a woman who was going as an officer of the court to argue about what the Constitution meant, who couldn't get a taxi in New York City. The book is also a story about things that are not talked about very often. It's a story about black immigrants to America who didn't come across the ocean in slave ships. That's a part of our heritage that we ought to know more about, and I think your book does a great deal to open that door and to begin to explore some of those dynamics. As was said earlier, it's a story of New Haven in Connecticut. It's a story of relationships between blacks and whites. Your relationship with Clarence Blakesley to your relationship with Jack Greenberg, both Jack Greenbergs. I think the record needs to be clarified, and that there is the Jack Greenberg, the court reporter, and there's the Jack Greenberg, the lawyer, who was having his words taken down by the court reporter, Jack Greenberg. If you're following me, you're still awake. It's a story of two institutions, the NAACP and the Legal Defense Fund. But basically, it's a history of America that too few of our children and too few of those children's parents really know and ought to know. And so I think that the happiest thing that can occur after this evening, after getting Judge Motley's signature on the book, is for us to go home and read it to our children, and make certain that they understand where they came from, where we are, and where we need to go. I introduce to you the Honorable Constance Baker Motley.
Thank you very much, my fellow New Haveners, for that for your thunderous applause, shall I say. I'm sure you don't want to hear another speech after all this time, and I don't plan to make one, but I certainly must thank everyone associated with this event, starting with Marilyn Ford and my niece Connie Royster and Kate Stitt Cabranes. I got your husband's note. And of course, everyone who has come here today to participate in this program that you have heard from. I have been deeply moved. I didn't know whether I could get up here and speak after hearing each of you in your tribute to me. I have been on what do they call it, a book signing tour, and I'm going, Drew, back to some of the places where I tried cases. You might be interested to know that by coincidence, I was at the University of Florida Law School yesterday, and they honored Virgil Hawkins, the first black who challenged the system of segregation in Florida by putting a plaque on the University of Florida Law School. And his sister was there, the only surviving member of that family. But that was one of the cases in which I participated. Of course, there were others. There was one against the University of Mississippi that you've heard about, the one against the University of Alabama, the University of Georgia, Clemson College in South Carolina. I guess you noted yesterday the death of George Wallace in Alabama. I was there when he stood in the schoolhouse door. We represented those two young people, Vivian Malone and James Hood went into the University of Alabama. And I've been, as I've said, going around to some of those places now, peddling my book, you know. But of course, now I am back home in New Haven. And this is, without a doubt, the largest book party that I've attended. You know, there are people in the audience who approached me that I went to grammar school with. I see one of them there smiling. There are people I went to junior high school with, and of course to New Haven High School. I want to thank them for taking the time to come here today to help with this celebration. I had not really expected to see them. It's been, should I tell our age? Yeah, I was 77 yesterday, and so they're right up there with me, you know. So we have seen a great deal in 77 years. We've seen America change for the better for all of us. not only for blacks, but for women, for Hispanics, for Asians, for American Indians, you name it. We have seen all of these groups in our society emerge. And of course, I guess the greatest progress has been made by members of the black community. I think one of the major results of the Brown case was that we can now see in the American community black people who are now in a new legal and economic status and who are prospering. I think the thing that moved me the most tonight was that there are in this audience people who are relatives of Clarence Blakesley, a man who, you know, was responsible for my education. And I want to thank them for coming. I've been deeply moved by that, because that is someone I could never forget. Now, Clarence Blakesley, as some of you probably know, was a Yale graduate. He graduated from Yale, I think it's 1885. It's all in my book. If I get these dates wrong, you know how it is when you get to 77, right? He graduated from Yale in 1885, I believe it was. And he went to the Yale Scientific School, Sheffield Scientific School, I guess it's called now, or was then. And he was a civil engineer. And when he graduated from Yale, he went to work for the New Haven Railroad. And he worked there for about 10 years. But about 1895, he joined his father's construction business. His father, Charles W. Blakesley, laid out Church Street in New Haven in 1840. He borrowed or bought with $5 some kind of instrument to begin this digging of Church Street. And Clarence Blakesley was the first member of his family to go to college. He had brothers who were very prominent in New York and New Haven society. One of his brothers was in the state legislature. I found that when I went to the New Haven library to try to find something that had been written about Clarence Blakesley. I couldn't find anything written about Clarence Blakesley. I went to the New Haven Colony Historical Society. They didn't have anything either. But when Clarence Blakesley died in 1954, in July, the New Haven Register had a 3-column obituary for him, in which I learned a great deal about Clarence Blakesley. I thought he had told me a great deal over the 5-year period that I went to college and law school, because he just didn't give me a check and say, here, you know, go to school. He was a mentor. And every year when I went back to see him for the check for the next year, he would take time and talk to me. He would say, now, if you want to be a lawyer, you have to take a course in public speaking. And I would say, well, Mr. Blake's at NYU, that's extra, you pay more for that. He said, don't worry about it. You take a course in public speaking. And then he said to me, you know, you never asked me for money for clothes. I have 2 daughters that went to college, and all they wanted was money for clothes. And that's the kind of man he was. He not only took over his father's business, I don't know what year that was, sometime prior to 1940, because in 1940 he was president of C.W. Blakesley and Sons, which was the largest construction company in New England. He built Walter Camp Field. He built all of the new dormitories in this century at Yale. He built the YMCA, the YWCA, the camp in Chester, where I also lived, Camp Hazen in 1923, because he was president of the YMCA in Connecticut. He was president of the New Haven Trap Rock Company, the Gaslight Company, I've forgotten the name of the insurance company. Again, it's in my book. He was one of the founders of the Union Trust Company. And as I say, by 1940, he was a man, he must have been a millionaire many times over. But you would not have known it by his appearance. His office was about 20 feet by 30 feet, totally unpretentious. And 2 of his grandchildren were in my graduating class at New Haven High School. Because when I went to see him, after I spoke at the Dixville Community House, he sent for me to come to see him. He said to me, I looked up your high school record, and I see where you graduated with honors. Why aren't you in college? And then some years later, when I was looking at my high school reunion program, I saw the names of his 2 grandsons. And he had said to me at that time, when I went to see him, that he had a grandson he was sending to Harvard Law School. But the point I want to make here is that he was a man who believed in public education, obviously, because his grandchildren were in the public schools. And he was a man who gave as much to New Haven, I think, as he got, so to speak, as a businessman. And I learned later that he was on a committee at Yale in the 1920s, which raised money to send New Haven boys who couldn't afford to go to Yale, because in those days, the 1920s, I think only the sons of rich men went to Yale. But Clarence Blakesley saw to it that other boys in New Haven who weren't so rich went to Yale. And I was certainly not the only black person that he helped. He helped Carter Marshall, who was a doctor here in New Haven, to go to Germany to study dermatology. And so, as I've said, the thing that has moved me the most is that there are his descendants here in this audience tonight, I want to say thank you for your ancestor who made my career possible and who made New Haven one of the greatest cities to live in. Thank you very much.
In politics is timing, and there isn't a lot more to be said. Actually, Clarence Blakesley does have his book in the New Haven Public Library, and it's right there, and I couldn't think of a book he'd be probably prouder of. And I'm reminded of one other thing. I don't know much about the law, Judge, as I prove to Tony and Guido all the time, but when they talk to me. But I do know about our city's neighborhoods and the people that live in them, particularly the children. And I'm often reminded that first how much information and things that you might think people would know. You know, kids in those neighborhoods are really very insular, small kinds of places, and don't always have a sense of possibility that matches their skills and talents, possibilities that they could achieve in their own life. And great stories, in order to be more than just great stories, need to be told. It's an important story for our neighborhoods. So even though, actually you came back on primary day too, I should tell you. You came back on primary day. Some things have not changed. You can still vote. We can arrange this later on. The way some of our candidates are doing, we may need your vote. But some things have not changed as well, and you're a great daughter of New Haven, and I'm proud to be your mayor today. Thank you.
We're going to be ending soon. I just wanted to acknowledge a proclamation which came in from Governor Rowland. Judge, would you like for me to read it? Okay, fine. I will read it to you. It's a state of Connecticut by His Excellency John G. Rowland. And Judge, at my age, I enlarged it, okay? Whereas Constance Baker Motley was born and raised in New Haven, Connecticut. She received her Bachelor of Arts degree from New York University, Washington Square College in 1943, and her Juris Doctorate degree from Columbia University School of Law in 1946. And whereas when she was a senior at Columbia University School of Law, Constance Baker Motley joined the legal staff of the NAACP and soon thereafter became its principal trial attorney. And whereas among her many accomplishments, she has presented 10 cases to the United States Supreme Court, of which she successfully argued 9. And whereas she also became the first black woman to serve as a senator on the New York State Senate when she was elected in 1964. And whereas in her personal and professional life, Constance Baker Motley has been a pioneer in the areas of civil rights and women's rights. And whereas she has chronicled her experiences in an autobiography, Equal Justice Under Law. And whereas Quinnipiac College School of Law, Yale Law School, and the Southern Connecticut Lawyers Association, Inc. are hosting a celebration and book signing in honor of Constance Baker Motley on September 15, 1998. Now, therefore, I, John G. Rowland, Governor, do hereby officially designate September 15, 1998 as the Honorable Constance Baker Motley Day in the state of Connecticut. Before I turn it back over to Dean Cogan, who will send us on our way, I just want to acknowledge a few people who have worked on this, and I'll do this very quickly. I'm a preacher's daughter, and I don't want people to do what they used to do to my dad when he started preaching and go too long. As they marched out one by one, the last person leaves, said, "Reverend, when you leave, lock it up." Okay, now, In no particular order, I would like to acknowledge my research assistants. Could you just stand, who have worked so on this? I think they're already standing. The members of BOSS of the Quinnipiac College School of Law. Just hold it. The members of the Women's Law Society of the Quinnipiac College School of Law. Secretaries Felicia, Judy, and Sue, who have worked so hard on this. And one person who didn't have a lot of choice in this because she happened to be living in my household, and that's my daughter, Kishka Kamari Ford. Kishka, could you please stand, okay? Kate, of course, Dith Cabranes, of course, Connie Royster. Could you please stand, Connie? Connie has been invisible. Connie has worked very hard on this and didn't get any recognition. And so many, many more. And we've already acknowledged the members of the federal judiciary who are with us. We also have many state court judges here. We have the entire federal probation department and officers, et cetera, here. We have presidents of almost every NAACP chapter in the state here, the Urban League, many, many members of the community. We have sorority people, we have fraternities, and we have presentations which are going to be made in the tent at the reception. And after we leave here, Judge Motley is going to sign more copies of the book. Judge Motley said it's not over till the last book is gone. Thank you so much.